Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Tales from the Inside. Please welcome your host for tonight's program, the wonderful, the amazing Angela Sawyer.
Yay! Hi. Thank you very much for being here. If you're watching this on the Comedy Studio website, thank you so much for checking out the Comedy Studio. It's a great place. And this is Tales from the Inside. This is a storytelling show that we've been doing almost every week during quarantine. And I have been telling stories for a long time, but doing it every week in quarantine, I have run out of things about my life to think about. That's for sure. And so at this point, I just tell you my trauma, and I hope you're okay with it. But we've got great performers here who are super funny. And this whole show is meant to be for people to be who they really are. I often say that comedians get a chance to practice, their gestures or what they're going to say and the order of their words and stuff. But very few people get a chance to practice just sort of like being themselves in real time, which sounds like you wouldn't have to practice it, but you'd be surprised. If you've ever been to a party and been like, ugh, then, or, just like afraid to talk to your crush or whatever, you know what I mean? So this is a chance for people to be who they are and figure out what they're going to say while they're talking. I gave them each their own theme, and they get to approach it however they want to. And in recent weeks, we have also expanded the scope of the show to include Hulk Hogan impersonators and a guy who played the trumpet and a bunch of other things because stories don't just happen through talking, they happen all sorts of ways. And so it's just turning into a ride, and that's how it goes. And so I'm glad you're here. Thanks for coming. Um, let's see. I'm going to start because that makes it easier on everybody. And I have a bunch of topics that I give people, and I've been trying to go through the topics and find out whether or not they're good when you get them, because it's been long enough that I kind of forgot what it's like to have somebody give you a topic and be like, "What happens when you think these things?" So tonight, you don't have to tell. A lot of times during the show, people will tell their story and then they'll say their topic at the end, but there's no real rule for that. So I will tell you straight up that tonight I'm going to take the topic a time that I knew my parents were liars. And uh, here's the thing, I think you can tell a lot about a person by how they reacted to being told about Santa Claus, for example. Like some people, some kids, when you tell them about Santa Claus, they're like, "Oh, my parents got me presents. That's pretty great." And some kids are furious. And uh, I, you know, when my mom sat me down one summer and told me that Santa was parents, I threw a glass of water at her, which that's not either a half full or a half empty. That's just a straight fuck you. So, uh, that just means that I was going to grow up to be an angry, resentful lady. And if you've met me, you knew I was that already. So it's all right. It's all right. I come from a long line of just short, dumpy, super resentful women. That's what we do. So it's cool. Uh, so I was thinking about a time that I really like was surprised at a lie. And so I was thinking back to when I was in high school. I grew up in Denver, Colorado. And I sorry to give you this news if it's your first 10 seconds meeting me, because it's a lot. But I'm a lot, so it'll be fine. I happened to attend Columbine High School, which I know, a classic now, right? Just old news. Uh, and I went there in the 80s, and it was not a great high school. Surprise. So when I went there, I don't know, I don't know how to explain this to you. People who are younger than me, I'm 50, so like a lot of people who do comedy are much younger than I am, which is great. I like hearing what they have to say, and but it's hard to remember if you weren't there. Back in the 70s and 80s, when everyone had landline phones, a phone just went to, like, every house was a single line. There were almost never multiple lines at a house. And it created this phenomenon where if someone was talking on the phone and there was another part of the house, it might have another connection to that same phone line. And uh, not everybody had houses with tons of rooms or tons of floors or whatever, but most people had more than one phone that had that same phone line. So if you wanted to spy on a conversation, you could just pick up a line in the other room, except that people would catch you because there was this little click sound that you would hear if you were on the line talking with somebody. You could hear somebody pick up and listen. And every kid that I knew had the experience of having a phone conversation with their friend, and then they'd hear that little click and they go, "Mom," because their parent had just picked up the phone to see what they were talking about. Not okay. So I did not get along well with my parents when I was a kid, especially when I was a teenager. And but one of the nicest things about being me and a teenager in the house that I grew up in was that my parents would leave the house for several hours or maybe a whole day, and then the place was mine to do whatever. If you can't tell from my glasses, I was a weird kid with not many friends. That's what these glasses were supposed to tell you. So I hope you got it. Uh, so I was very socially anxious and I didn't quite know how to deal with people. So when my parents left me alone in the house, that was like the best time that could happen because I could read whatever books were around the house. I could listen to records that were lying around the house. I could just sort of like partake in whatever I wanted. And when my parents were around, because we didn't have a great relationship, I was grounded from all those things. I was grounded from all sorts of things, mostly from things that nobody is grounded from because we didn't get along very well and it was a mess. So when they would leave, I would be like, oh, now's the time. And I would usually go down into the basement of the house because that was where records were. And I could sit there and read a book. And then if I heard them coming in, I had a couple minutes to like hide whatever I'd been doing as like a 12, 13-year old. Because, like listening to Eagles records, holy cow, what a sinful thing for me to be doing. Um, so I could hide it and then I could pretend that I had been doing chores. So I would like take some laundry to like hang up on the line in the basement, and then I would read a book or listen to a record or whatever. And one day I was doing that and the phone rang, and without really thinking about it, I just picked up the phone, and it turned out that unbeknownst to me, my parents were home. I thought that they were gone and I was just like downstairs. And I don't know how long they had been home or what the story was. But when I picked up the phone, I heard my stepmother on the other end say hello, which meant that either we had picked up the phone right at the same time or just close enough to where she had heard the magical click, and I didn't know which one it was. And I didn't say anything. She said hello, and I was like, oh my gosh, am I in a lot of trouble now? Because of course, parents spying on their kids, totally fine, but kids spying on their parents, that's cause for who knows what. So I was like freaked out. But instead of either of those things happening, what happened is this girl that I knew from school named Christy said hello back. And she said, I'm looking for Angela. And my stepmother was like, oh, Angela's not here right now, which I was like, okay. And then, they were polite and the phone call ended. And I hung it up and I was like, oh, I think I just dodged a huge bullet. I don't think anybody knew I heard that call. And I was freaked out because I was like, my parents were home and I didn't realize. They might wonder what I'm doing and they don't know where I am. And like, that's big. If you don't get along with your parents, little things like that create tension are like triggers for big arguments and so on. So I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get upstairs immediately. So I took the laundry and I went right upstairs. And I went upstairs, and my stepmother, to my surprise, was very flat. She wasn't freaked out that I just came out of the basement door. And I didn't know how long she'd been there or anything. And I was just like, oh, whatever. And she probably noticed that I was tense because it's hard to hide things when you're a kid. But instead of doing any of those things, she said, my stepmother looks me straight in the face and she's like, so some girls just called and they were making fun of you for the way that you act at school. And I was like, what? It was a super huge shock. I was just like, huh? And she was like, yeah, they notice how you've been acting at school. And then she just like went on. She was like, they think you're ugly and she just like went in on all the things that she thought I was lousy at or whatever. So I was like, oh, what? And it was so big a shock that I just was like, okay, and I went away. I just like kept walking with the laundry because I didn't know what to do, and nothing like that had ever happened to me. So I was just like, okay, and I just kept walking, and I replayed it a bunch of times in my head, and eventually I realized that my stepmother had just made that up. She was just trying to be shitty to get me to do who knows what, and then I immediately started thinking more and more about other interactions that I'd had with her, and like she had a big habit of walking into my room when she knew I was changing clothes, and then like making really nasty comments about how she thought I looked. She was a nasty person, but it made me realize like, oh my gosh, this and this and this and this and this and this, and it like the whole house started to tumble. And it was all because of this innocent phone call from this girl named Christy. And eventually, over the course of a couple of years, I like figured out what was happening. And I eventually moved out and got my own apartment. And, that lady's just sad now somewhere else and it's all fine. And I turned out okay and it's no big deal. I'm perfectly fine and I can like, I have my own apartment and nothing, who knows what happened to her, but it doesn't matter. But here's the thing. It also, as I started to figure that stuff out, I was like, Christy, completely innocently, she saved me. I felt like Christy did me such a huge, huge favor by just calling me out. She was just probably trying to hang out that day or whatever. And I didn't get to tell Christy really what happened. And the reason is that Christy and I were not really friends. Uh, we could debate all day whether 13-year-olds are really friends. I don't know. But at any age, Christy and I weren't really friends. What Christy and I did was we almost never spoke. We were in a couple classes together. We knew each other, to see each other in the hallways at school. But what we did is we hardly ever spoke to each other, but every day at lunchtime at school, we would walk out of the school and walk to her house, which was like across the street from the school. It was like a 2-minute walk. And then we'd go into her parents' kitchen and Christy would make herself a sandwich and I would not say anything and not eat a sandwich. And then Christy, while she was eating her sandwich, she would put on this videotape, a VHS tape that she had that was a loop of a music video that played like 30 or 40 times in a row. I'm going to share my screen and see if I can get you a version of the music video. Let's see if I can do it. Yes, so here is the very charming 80s music video. This is one without music so that I can talk over it. And this, by the way, this musicless version of this very famous video was made by a guy named Mario. You can see it down there. I just wanted you to realize that I didn't make this. So we would watch a-ha's Take on Me over and over and over and over again every single day at lunch. This is a great version of the video, much better than the original. Whoa. When I was 12, these motorcycle guys seemed very scary. And I was so impressed. that just like Christy, the guy in the video saved this nice lady. And she was very sad that she lost him. But then it turned out that cartoon world people just break out of their cartoon world after a little work. It takes them a minute. But they just do that because it's hot and they want to have sex immediately. And this is how I realized several years later that Christy was probably relentlessly hitting on me and I didn't figure it out. And I could have had an even nicer time than I had had. I'm very grateful to her for helping me figure out what was fucked up about my life. But truth be told, I could have had a much nicer time if I had just gotten to make out with Christy. And that is the story of how I found out that my parents were liars. Unfortunately, it turns out they were liars even worse than they thought. And if someone plays you a video where cartoon characters get very sweaty for no reason and stare at each other a lot, that person wants to put their tongue in your face. You should know that. PSA advice for you in the future. So that is my story. Thank you guys for listening very much. I appreciate it. So, thank you.
Yes.
Christy, by the way, is a real person, a very nice person who is now a firefighter in Denver, which is pretty cool because that sounds, I rode a bike last week for the first time in like 10 years. And Christy is out there fucking saving people from burning buildings. So she's pretty awesome. I'm very excited for the performance that you're going to get to see on the show. They're really, really cool. Our first performer, this guy is super awesome. I like him a lot. I give him some shit sometimes because I feel like it's the bar for being a good dad is pretty low. And so when you see someone who sets the bar high, you want to point it out. And this guy, I don't know how many kids he has or doesn't have, but he's going to make a great dad one way or another. He's very, very funny. You're going to like him a lot. Please welcome the awesome John Farrell.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I have 0 children. 0 children so far in my life. But I was gonna talk about a time I thought I was really gonna save the world. And before I looked up some people who actually saved the world before I'm gonna get into my story. Like during the Cold War, this Russian guy, Stanislav Perton, he was in charge of monitoring satellites over the United States in case like a missile was launched. And one day or night, I don't know, probably night. Night sounds cooler, personally, I think. But he had a malfunction on his alarm, and instead of just like panicking, telling his commanding officer, "Oh, you should launch a missile at the United States right now," he said it was an alarm malfunction. And he kind of saved the world from nuclear destruction. And on the same website, another man who saved the world was Leonardo DiCaprio. He drives Tesla, and I think it's about the same. But in the time I thought I was really going to save the world is once in college, I drove a bunch of people to a party in a U-Haul. And I got paid like $60 to do it, and I was driving the snowboard club on their end of the year party. And if you don't know anything about like snowboarding culture, it's kind of like skiers. Like they can be like skiers can be rude, but in a snide way. And snowboarders can be rude in a way that they'll call a dog the C word. They're just not good people. But I was told I was going to be driving a van. It was mostly shame on me for not asking questions. And I showed up and I see this U-Haul and I'd start instantly panicking. And I had a friend come up to me and goes, "Hey, just so you know, this is a stupid idea. But I'm still getting the back of that U-Haul," which is not something I wanted someone to tell me. That's not, and they're like, "Plus you're getting $60." And I was like, that's not, I guess that's a fair trade from that. But like I learned, like it was just so I learned a lot about like everyone was dressed really interesting. Like all these dudes are just like they're dressed like divorced dads with something to prove. They were wearing like Hawaiian shirts, a suit jacket, and jean shorts and Vans. Very just like real aggressive divorced dads. and I was about to tell him like I couldn't do it, but then I realized if I don't do this, like someone's gonna drive this U-Haul and they're gonna drink and drive, and like you can, I just like imagine that U-Haul tipping over with all these people in the back, and I was like, I guess I have to do this. So I'm driving this U-Haul like as slowly as I can. I'm like remembering every video that I saw from driver's ed, and all those videos, they're in a Toyota Corolla. I was not prepared for a fucking U-Haul, and it was, and like I was just really nervous the whole time. I was just like, they told me that I should just hang around to the end of the party because like eventually someone's gonna need a ride. And I was like, well, I'm not going to give someone a fucking ride to U-Haul. That seems like a waste of gas, personally. They're like, okay, that's fine. Like, you might have to drive like half the people back. And I was like, all right, I guess I can do that. But like, I was just like hanging out there, and I don't want to say it was like Lord of the Flies, but it was probably as annoying as if you were on Lord of the Flies. Like, it was just like, there were just like people just fighting about snowboarding. I don't know. I wasn't really paying attention to them. And there was just like someone just started burning furniture for no reason. And this was in upstate New Hampshire, where there is just plenty of fucking firewood. They just chose to burn the furniture of some guy's house they rented it from. But like eventually like I was really nervous about driving this at night. And then I knew it was going to happen. So because it's real sketchy to see a U-Haul at midnight on a Saturday. No one's moving that late, just anxiously moving. But so I finally get up to move some people back, and it's probably around like midnight. And then I turn it on, and I realize I don't know how to turn the lights on. And someone's like, oh, that's not a big deal. Just drive with the headlights on. No, drive with the high beams on the whole time. And I just told them, I think you have to sit in the back now. And they're like, why? I was like, I think that's just the rules of the road. You can't. That's a big, big red flag. Like, what are you talking about? I was like, I can't have this conversation with you. But I finally figured it out. And it was weird. Like, I got back, and like, I can say, like, I really felt good that, my only like saving grace this whole time, because I just saw all this like weird stuff going on. And like, I was like, at least no one's drinking driving. Like, that's the one thing I kept telling myself. Because like if one of them did, like they're these people that do extreme sports, like their fight or flights usually fight, and they're not afraid. Like their risks don't, like they have like a concept of risk, but they're not afraid to take them. And I just kept saying, like, at least no one's driving. At least no one's driving. But like if this ends up being the moment in my life where I'm like, I really saved the world. I really saved a bunch of snowboards, and it's not from a fucking avalanche. Like I don't think that's going to be something I'm like, oh yeah, that's cool. I can live with that. Like I need something to change to do that. It doesn't make you feel good. Like, oh man, I saved a bunch of dudes in jean shorts who were wearing shirts ironically, so they could continue to wear shirts ironically. It's not something like I felt that good about. And like I remember that before like we left, I remember I saw like this cop came up, and I think this is the only time in my life I've been excited to see a cop. I was like, wow, there's no way he can let me drive this U-Haul. And he let me drive that fucking U-Haul. And I was like, wow, this is bad police work. I was like, oh, I was so excited. I was like, oh man, I might get detained for this. You can't drive a U-Haul when you're detained. It's fucking impossible. But it was such a weird fucking time. I'll say this, though, everyone at that party was a bad person, myself included. There was no good thing to happen. Like, I don't know. It's like I want, if I really want to save the world, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I know that I can't be saving the world driving a bunch of fucking assholes to a party in the U-Haul. And that's all I had to say, guys. Thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think I definitely, I mean, I'm a middle-aged white lady, so of course I also have a story about a time I did something incredibly that I should have been arrested for, and nothing bad happened at all. And my favorite example of that is I used to like to take a day's drive. I used to own a record store, and so I would take a day's drive and go buy records because, much like plants, if you drive far enough away, the records get different, and then you can bring them back, and you have different records that people haven't seen where you are. I know that's a weird concept sometimes for people, but that's how it works, I promise. So I would drive to when I finally got a license. I didn't get a license until I was like 35, and I finally got one. And I was like, I could drive to get cool records. So I would take a day. I would drive to Montreal, fill up the car with as many records as I could afford to buy, and then just turn around and drive back. And I would make it there and back in like 24 hours. And
Whoa.
which is too. That's like, don't do that. That's a bad idea from Boston. That's too long. But the best part was every time I did, there were it was at a time when there started to be a bunch of warnings about taking things over the border, and the US customs agents were being, cruel to people, and you could have trouble. And I would hear about musicians who got stopped at the border. And so I was like, oh, I should wear a cardigan maybe. and uh, and so every time I came back from the border, they would be like, what do you have with you? Do you have anything with you? And one time I was like feeling kind of nervous about it. And I was like, I can't say records. They're going to think there's too many. I'm going to have to explain what they are. It's going to be a whole weird mess. So this guy, this US customs agent, he leans up in my car with a big flashlight, and he's like, what do you have in here with you? And I said, plants. Which is the wrongest possible answer, the very wrongest answer I could have given. And the guy took one look at my cardigan and my big pudgy white face, and he was like, come on in, honey. And yeah, that's a story of why you should let me smuggle your drugs, I guess, because it'll work great, and you'll get a lot of drugs. Cool. Okay, so I'm very excited for our next performer. I've seen her at the Comedy Studio open mic. She's super, super funny, and I'm super glad. I haven't had her on a storytelling show before, and I'm super glad to have her. So please put your hands together right now for Mira Abbasalut.
So I have little stories. My theme was a time that I lied to a little kid or something. So like one time I was with my dad and his friend, and they had like this little kid, like 2 years old, and it was like late at night, and I guess they just wanted to go to a whole bunch of restaurants or cafes, and so I was like taking care of him, and then like while my dad's friend was hitting on women, I don't know why, but I was like, so it was at the end of the night, and he's like, please don't go. And then I was like, oh, I'll see you tomorrow. That's what they told me, like, we'll bring him tomorrow. And then we just like never saw him again. So I felt bad, but I didn't know I was lying. And then like a lot of the times for like my nieces and nephews or cousins, they would always ask for like cookies or like popsicles or anything that I like chocolate or something. I'll be like, oh, we ran out. Sorry. We have to go to the store. We like, and the store is closed, and it'll be like 5 o'clock. Like everything's open. A lot of times, like I would ask my mom, like, who's your favorite? And she'd be like, oh, I love you all the same. And then so I told like everybody, like, oh, I'm her favorite. Like I just lie to myself. But she would tell like everybody the same thing, like, oh, I love you all the same. But I don't believe her. So like we would always like be older than my cousins, so we would go to like things, and we would just like the movies or like a party or something, and then like so they wouldn't feel bad. We would always lie and say like, oh, it wasn't fun without you, so don't worry, you didn't miss out on anything. And then like my nephew kept asking me if he was singing along to the radio, and he was like, do I sound good? And I was like, sure, yeah, you sound great. And then like he would be playing video games because we share a room for a while, and he'd be playing until like 2 a.m, and he's like, are you gonna tell my mom? And I'm like, no, of course not. And I'll be like texting her right away, like get him off, like, because you can unplug the Wi-Fi from downstairs. So I'll just be like, I don't know what happened to your game. Like I just lie a lot. And then my brother, because my dad remarried, and so he's like asking me, "Do you think my parents will get back together?" And I'm like, "Sure, maybe one day." And also, my nephew kind of gets haircuts from different places sometimes, so it's not really the best. So he's like, "How's my haircut?" And I'm like, "It's so good. You can see your face more." And he's like, "Are you lying? You're overdoing it. Like you're overselling it." I'm like, "No, it looks great." But like I remember when I was younger and I got haircuts and everyone would tell me it looks good, and I'm like, I can tell when you're lying. Like, probably tell. And then I have some times when I was little that I got lied to. I don't know if that counts, but
Sure.
so I asked my dad to put me in like piano lessons, and then my sister was in guitar and my other sister was in drumming. And then all of a sudden we were just taken out of it, and he said it was because my older sister was rude or something, but really it was because he just like didn't have money and just like made up a reason. And then my older sister, we were at the mosque, which is like a religious worship place, and this girl was like, "Hey, I know you from like last time you were here." And she's like, "No, that was my evil twin sister." She's like, "What? No, you don't. You don't have a sister." And I was like, she just kept over saying it and like just kept emphasizing it. And then the girl like believed that she had an evil twin. And then she told me that she like mousse, like that you put in your hair, is made from moose fat. I don't know why. It's weird. Um, um, and then like I think my dad remarried another time, and he tried to tell us like it was our fault, but it really was his fault. We moved around a lot, and he was telling us like when we bought a house, like this is the last time we're gonna move, and then 3 years later we moved again. So, um, and then we tell my niece that like there's a monster that's gonna come, like when she doesn't want to come in the house or doesn't want to leave the park or something. We just tell her a monster will get her, and then she comes with us. My sister started it, not me, so not that bad. um, I think I may have one more. Oh yeah, there was my grandfather was like a butcher, and he had a bunny. He brought it over, and then we were playing with it the whole day, and then all of a sudden like he killed it. And then my cousins were like younger than me, and they were there, and then they were like, oh, my grandparents were like offering us bunny for dinner, which is really creepy, but we were like, they're like, is this the bunny we were playing with all day? And then they were like, no, no, it's not. This is chicken. Like, but other than that, my family's good.
Amira, thank you very, very much. Give it up for her. That was fantastic. I do think I think there's lots to say there. One, every kid has this point, I feel like, where you're just old enough to figure out that that you should sometimes say something that's not real to save someone's feelings. But then you don't know how. And there's always a weird like thing where you try to do it to another kid and you tell them you're 17 when you're obviously not, or whatever. I can remember meeting some cousins on a trip somewhere, and like being and having like the kid whose house I was staying at be like, you should tell those kids you're 22. And I was like, they'll totally believe that. And I was 12 and I looked 6. There was no way they were going to believe it. And when I told them, they were like, yeah. And then I was like, it worked. And then later you're like, oh, that didn't work at all. So I think that's the thing kids do, definitely. And I think kids also, especially younger kids, accidentally kill animals a ton. It's one of those things no one ever talks about, but it's very real. It's something kids do all the time, and they don't mean to, and because they don't realize like what it is. I'll tell you this, and it's going to creep you out. So don't at me later. People who are in this Zoom can at me all they want, but don't freak out. I did not turn out to be a serial killer. I'm a very nice, stupid lady. When I was 4 or 5 years old, very young, too young to even really remember it. Apparently, according to my parents, and this is a story I believe, I had a baby buggy, like a pink baby buggy that I was always pushing around the house everywhere. And my parents got a kitten, and I always tried to put the kitten in the baby buggy so I could push it around the house. And the kitten did not want to stay in the baby buggy, so I tried to put the kitten in a plastic bag. And kitten did not die. I was caught instantly. And all of a sudden, my parents told me that I was allergic to cats. And I found out when I was like 12 that I'm not actually allergic to cats. And then I realized, like, oh, that story. Oh, and so yeah, growing up is definitely it's one of those things where you realize a lot of things later. And that's part of the reason why I like those themes about how you learn things. So thanks, Amir. That was fantastic. All right. Let's see. I think so far I've screwed up everyone's name. I said John's name wrong. I said Amira's name wrong. I'm going to see if I can get it right third time. So our next performer, I'm very, very excited. We're going to have a good time. So our next performer is someone who I know through playing music. She's super sharp. And recently we had some musicians on the show and she couldn't be here that week. So I'm very excited to have her this week. She teaches kids and she plays improvised stand-up bass. She's incredible. You're going to love her to death. So please put your hands together right now for Brittany Carlson.
5, 6, 7, 8. Step to the left. 5, 6, 7, 8. Heel toe, heel toe. Step together, step apart. Count 5, 4, 6, 7, 8. 1 heel toe, heel toe. Oh, step 5, 4, 1, 2, 7, 8. Oh, oh. The end.
Woo!
Yay!
Yay!
Brittany, thank you very much.
Having me. What? Ours.
Tell me, are you, I know comedians mostly don't have anything coming up, but are you teaching classes right now?
Yes, I am. I'm teaching private lessons, and I am also co-teaching an old time ensemble, like old time Appalachian fiddle music, and a bluegrass ensemble with guitarist Stash.
Nice.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Awesome. Well, everyone who you see here tonight, Eli's got their handles up, and follow them because they're all doing cool things. I only have people on the show that I like, so you should check it out. Thank you again, Brittany. That was fantastic. Yeah, it's just nice to have happy stuff happen. It's very nice. All right, our next performer, I'm super excited for her. She runs, used to in the before times, ran a really cool mic in Dorchester down the street from me. And she's also in charge of a group that is coming together of people who are putting on shows and stuff. She's really fucking great. I love her to death. And she's so fun. You are going to love her immediately. So please welcome Sarah Francis.
Woo-hoo! Hi guys. Thank you so much, Angela. Thank you for having me. Welcome to the plague, guys. Welcome to the plague. So my story is going to be about how I turned into my parent for a minute. Or at least for me, it was when I recognized that I was like my parent. So it brings me back to this set of photos from a cruise that my dad and I took when I was about, I'd say 25. So my dad, as a present for my stepmother, bought tickets on a cruise, which was really lovely. Except he made a mistake and booked the cruise to the Caribbean. And my stepmother is from Grenada, and her response was, why would I want to go to the Caribbean when I'm from the Caribbean for a vacation? Take me to Paris. Take me to Paris. So I felt really bad for my dad. They were unrefundable tickets. And so he and I took a father-daughter cruise. And I would like to say that we are not cruise people, my dad and I. Not cruise people. We don't really believe in buffets. I am probably the only person who's ever been on a buffet, on a cruise, who didn't attend the buffet. It's mainly the germ thing. Like, you can kind of see the petri dish that is the maraschino cherries when you're trying to get yourself a sundae. And also sitting still. My dad and I are very hyperactive. You guys, I've walked away from this camera like 16 times in the last hour. And so sitting on a cruise is really hard for us. So whenever we would dock, we would do excursions. So I think we went horseback riding, snorkeling, on a long hike, on many, many tours. Whatever we could do to get off that ship, we did every single time. And this set of pictures is from this cruise that I remember very well. And at night, my dad, who is a fantastically fun and boisterous man, would go to the dance clubs, and the ladies would love him because he would get out and dance with them. Now, one thing that did happen on this cruise, and has happened most of my adult life, is that people get into a conversation with my dad and I, and the first thing that they say is, how long have you been together?
Oh,
God.
And it's always a little awkward because I have to say, this is my father. Can you not see it? Now, I should explain that my father is noticeably African American, and I am culturally passing for white. So I understand why people, maybe at first glance, might assume we're a couple as opposed to a parent and child. But I have my dad's face 100%. I mean, take my nose, mouth, the crooked smile, even slightly crooked teeth, and that is my dad's face. Um, and it's always been sort of this experience of knowing that I look just like my father, but within the cultural spaces that are very white, as a cruise ship often is, I don't look like my dad. Um, and that's something that I've always sort of had to deal with and grapple with and be in social situations. And it brings me back to childhood and thinking about growing up in Boston as a biracial child of this interracial couple who were both very politically active. And I have this memory of my dad being very proud to take me to this Black revolutionary book fair. And we're gonna be political and Marxist and revolutionary and Black power. But he had to bring this little white girl with him. And it was a very interesting experience how the Black community treated him and treated me. That day was the first time I had ever heard, quote unquote, a love child, and had to have my dad explain it to me as he got very uneasy and tense. And my response to him, I remember after he explained how they were being snide and they thought they were being cute and joking. But I said, don't they see? I have your face. And I remember him kind of looking at me, sort of frowning a little, because he didn't want to talk about how my face was a different color than his face. And so people couldn't see that it was the same face and that it was very cultural. Now, I'll speak to the fact that I look nothing like my mother. My mother, very European, redheaded, green eyes, spent most of my life with people comparing her to looking like Maureen O'Hara. So about as European as possible. And I would have the experience of her introducing me to people. And I remember one experience where this very sweet administrator in a school that my mother was teaching in at the time, we were introduced and she kept looking at me and she's smiling. And then she looks at my mother and then she looks back at me. Then she looks at my mother and with these big full cheeks, she goes, "You look just like your mother." And I kind of thought, okay, but it kept happening. And I don't know if it's that people were being kind or if, and my brain went to it as the 12, the 13, the 14-year-old, is it the color of our skin just makes us look more alike to certain people? So this idea of being like a parent, that moment of catching yourself and being your parent, I've had, but mainly when it's come to actions that are like my mother. I speak more like my mother and I act more like my mother. When I'm in social situations, I am definitely on like my mother is. My father has a gravity to his character. He is not the first person to laugh or to make himself seem silly. And so I do have sometimes a hard time seeing myself as him. But I've looked back at these photos from this cruise, and there we are horseback riding. and we both have the caps on, and we both have sunglasses on, and we're both smiling at the camera with this really awful crooked smile. And I see me in his face, and I see him in my face. And we're standing on the pier, the last day of the cruise. His arm around me. And I keep looking back at this picture because at no other time, I think, in my life did I see so much that I was his daughter and that I was him, even though there are so many differences between the two of us. But that I don't need to explain it to people, that I don't need to be offended when people don't see it. It's there. So that's my story, guys.
Woo! Thank you
Yeah.
so much. That was fantastic. That's beautiful. I'm glad that you get to see yourself and your dad. I mostly see myself in my mom when I am roasting people. One of the things I think about growing up that you have to learn is like everybody is both loved and hurt by their parents, and it's different degrees, and no matter how much they love you, they hurt you, and no matter how much they hurt you, they love you. And how you treat the outside versions of them is one thing, but you have to always, I think everyone gets to a point where they have to forgive the version of their parents that is inside their own skull. Is that clear enough? Do you guys know what I'm saying? Like, you walk around with a version of your parents inside your skull that you have to figure out how to resolve your issues with, whatever they may be. And there is nothing I love more than letting my mother talk through me when I have to insult someone viciously and make them sad. And it's so easy. Feels
my
so
God.
good. Feels really good. So yeah. Everything that your parents did for you and to you can help you. Let them know you love them. Let them know if you hate them. Just let them know. But thank you. That was absolutely gorgeous. Thank you so much, Sarah. I've got one more performer for you, and I'm so excited. He's fantastic. He's one of the funniest comics in Boston. I love every time I see him on a show because I love it when he freaks somebody out. There's always some little 20-year-old girl he scares the living shit out of, and it's beautiful to watch. He's so fun. He's super funny. I have no idea what he's going to talk about, but I'm super psyched for whatever it is. So please welcome Sham Supermanian.
Thanks, Angela. Thank you so much. All your guys' stories was awesome. Sarah, that was really beautiful. Amira, Brittany, that was awesome. I was sitting here laughing. That was really cool. And John, that was hilarious too. I'm assuming you, John, you were with all white men, I assume?
Yep.
Powerful white men. There's nothing wrong with that, John. Embrace it. Embrace it. There's a lot of people like my father would like to be you. But anyway, so, you know, Angela, so I was actually supposed to be on the show last week, and Angela gave me a topic. My topic was the first time you really made a real home. That's what it was, correct, Angela? First time you made a real home. And, you know, I was a little unsure about the show, and last week I ended up having a prior appointment that I couldn't make it. But going into it, I was like, oh, I'll just tell them, I'll just tell the story of the first time I got late. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about telling you guys that. I'm like, that is just fucking juvenile, like 20-year-old white male bullshit that all my friends would love. Sure.
Hey, pussy's a home, you know?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, no, you're fine. It's funny that you bring that up because it actually wasn't my home. It was my aunt's home. And the only real payoff was that I overfed the cat. And so when she came home, the cat went to the bathroom all over the house, and there was condoms all over the living room. So it's really an uneventful and really stupid story. So I wanted to dig deeper and kind of because this is storytelling, and Angela, when you told me it doesn't have to be funny, I was like, okay, well, I'd like to kind of explore, and kind of reach back and think about some stuff. And I kind of I talk about race a lot in my stand-up comedy, and I think sometimes people, I mean, because I make very racist jokes, and people think I'm just trying to be, sort of, just shocking, and that is part of it. But another part of it is, I think, for me personally, I've always been confused about my race, and I'll explain that in these stories that you'll see. So and I didn't want to switch topics because I relate this topic of finding my own home personally, and I relate that very close to my identity as a person, because it's something throughout the years. And I think for any of us, you're always kind of searching for who you are and how you identify yourself and sort of how you present that. And so throughout life, there's been many moments I've been confused about my race, partly because I'm dumb. And then the other part is because of the experience I've had and sort of subconscious sort of blocking stuff out. So, I mean, it all starts, I was born in this country, and, and Sarah, I really loved your story, because when you talk about how, so your father's Black, you see your face in your father. It's so obvious that you guys are related. And I vividly remember, as a child, I have vivid memories of how I felt, of feelings I had when I was a child, and thoughts that I had as a child. And I can 100% tell you, as a child, I never saw race as anything. I didn't know what I was. I didn't know what other kids were. If I saw a white kid, Black kid, truly was all the same. And so that's, when racism, it really is, it's a learned, taught behavior, because it's totally does not exist in a kid. And I remember I grew up with the Spanish family next door to us in our apartment complex, and was growing up, and eventually got into elementary school. And as you're starting to get into like the second, third grade, I had an older sister, so I was listening to whatever she was listening to, and pop culture was sort of starting to emerge. And I started getting into sports, and I really became such a big basketball fan, which is, of course, it's widely predominantly Black men. So I started seeing, Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley and all these guys, and identifying in them because they look kind of similar. So I'm like, okay, I'm identifying in them. And as I was growing up in elementary school, I'll never forget, there was an incident where I probably shouldn't say his name, but Michael Lodato, this guy who I went to school with, we had some sort of like tiff over a girl, and he told me, oh, she only likes you because you're a Black kid. And I'll never forget when he said that I was like, I'm Black. I'm a Black man. And at the time we were learning about civil rights, and we were learning about and I became so in tune with that. I remember for a recital, I was playing Martin Luther King as a character in a play, and I just fully embraced him. And in my mind, I knew I was Indian, but I was like also ignorant and so stupid that I was just like, oh, well, I'm Black too. And it was, and I just held on to that. I held on to that. And I remember even one day driving with my dad, who's a borderline insane person. And I go, hey, Dad, I'm getting made fun of at school. Kids are throwing jokes, and I would get made fun of. Not made fun of, but when we were starting to learn about civil rights, I vividly remember having KKK jokes thrown at me. I remember there's a scene in Waterboy where the Black kicker kicks a Ku Klux Klan head member through the goalpost. I don't know if you guys ever seen Waterboy. And I remember we were in the theater, and all the white kids just turned and looked at me, and I'm like, what the fuck are they looking at me for? I had no idea. And I was like, oh, they think I'm Black. I'm like, okay. And all these incidents just reinforced that idea. And I'll never forget, I was driving with my dad. I'm like, listen, I'm getting made fun of. I'm like, are we Black? And he goes, yes, we're Black. And I was like, oh, okay. And he was just totally fucking with me. He thought, I don't know what his deal was. I don't know if he was just like, oh, this motherfucker will figure it out. Or if he was just bored that day. Because my dad's a pretty neurotic guy. He's brilliant. And I to this day, I asked him, I go, do you remember that? And he goes, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. I was like, okay. So it was totally probably just in passing. He probably didn't even know what I asked him. But I remember that incident. And I remember going, carrying that. And I remember I finally got to middle school. And when I got to middle school, 9/11 happened. And I'll never forget this moment. 9/11 happened. And I came home. that day. My English teacher told us to, they stopped, everything that was going on. They're like, guys, there was a trade center attack. And I fully, I was around like 13 years old at the time. I still fully didn't really understand what was going on. And then I got home and it's all over the news. And then my dad's just fucking bitching at the TV. It's like, like just going off about like whatever, politics, Democrats, all this shit. And I remember going to bed then. I remember going to school that day. And it just by chance, I was walking next to a classmate of mine. He was Usama Sadat. He was a Pakistani Muslim fellow. And up until this point, like I said, I'm like still kind of, I know I'm Indian, but I'm thinking I'm black. I'm dressing baggy. I'm listening to rap music, whatever. I'm truly identifying with that culture. And I'll never forget, the English teacher pulled us aside. She's like, listen, Usama and Sham, if anybody, and this was the day after 9/11, this was 9/12. She's like, listen, when you guys go in there, if any students give you crap or make fun of you, you are to come to us like right away and tell us right away. We have your full support. And I'll never forget, I was looking at her, I'm like, what the fuck is this woman talking about? I'm not a fucking terrorist. I'm black. I'm like, what do you, like, you are stupid, lady. I go, get out of here. You're dumb. Get away from me. And then those 9/11 jokes started happening. Those terrorism jokes started happening. And, and I know, Amira, you're Muslim, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Amira will tell you like the history between Muslims and Hindus has always been, obviously for our generation, we don't give a fuck. I used to date a Muslim girl. I don't give a fuck. But, for people of my dad's, age, who's 70 years old, there's this like deep rooted history. So then there's this like confusion. I'm thinking like, okay, am I a Pakistani Muslim? And my dad's like, no, we're an Indian Hindu. You're not a Muslim. Like, and then there's that whole fucking narrative. So now there's this. So now I'm shying away from this black thing. And now I'm like, okay, so now I know I'm not Middle Eastern, but I'm like kind of from there. But all these white kids that I went to school with, they're all just grouping us the same. So I know that I'm not, it's like I know that I'm this Indian, but I'm getting it all intertwined with these races as these life events are going on. So then that happens. And then so we get that's happening maybe like a few months later. I was a big wrestling fan. And I remember I was begging my dad to just take me to a wrestling show, And he never would because he's a cheap Indian and he never wanted to buy tickets. And one day there was this like show in Fitchburg, maybe like 45 minutes from us. And he's like, all right, we're going to go. But what we're going to do is we're going to go towards the end so we don't have to pay. And I go, okay. And I didn't really know anything about Fitchburg at the time. Granted, it's one of the most disgusting places on the face of this earth. I'm sorry if you're from there. It's a horrible place. It's just gun store, liquor store, gun store, liquor store, liquor store, gun store. And it's and we get there and we get to the arena and my dad walks up to the guys like and just talks to him for like 45 minutes and it's like, okay, we don't have tickets and we get in. And I'm excited. I'm a kid. I'm like, oh, this is my first wrestling show. I'm so excited. And we get in and we watch it and we're watching it. And, we see it and I'm seeing all the types of people around at a wrestling show, which you could imagine. It's all backwoods people. And I'm watching this and I'm enjoying it. And then I'll never forget, as we're leaving, the third identity crisis popped up. I was like, I'm not black. I'm not a Muslim Pakistani. I'm not Indian. I'm white trash. I'm white trash. And so that's when my whole white identity took the mold. And eventually I got to high school. I started getting into sports and I fully firmed, I knew I was, now at this point, now you're fully educated. And now there's really no confusion here because it's, although it was 20 years ago, so definitely a different time. But I think, where I grew up in Stoneham, Mass, it was still fairly liberal. And I was lucky enough to have a lot of educated people around me, a lot of educated friends around me. That kind of like helped me sort of, really get a full grasp on my identity. And so, by the time high school rolled around, I knew what I was and I kind of fed into it. I was the quirky Indian guy, who was a complete disappointment to his parents. And I've fully embraced that as I talking to you from their basement at age 31. And this is where I've officially found and made my home. And that's kind of my story, my full track of how now I feel at home. I'm more at peace with my identity and who I am. And I've accepted and it's okay to be a piece of shit. It's totally fine. The world needs pieces of shit, as long as you smile and you're nice to everybody else. So that was my story, guys. I thank you for listening to my blabber, and I really, really appreciate it. You guys were all awesome, so thank you.
And thank you so much. That was fantastic. I appreciate it a lot.
Of course.
I'm very old, so my encounter with, for example, I was 31 and working at a terrible warehouse when 9/11 happened, and so my memory of it is that we couldn't get on the internet all day.
Yeah.
It's very different. And then I went home and my roommates were watching the news, and I was mad at them because we were the news was like, I thought of the news as propaganda, as bullshit that you shouldn't pay attention to. And so I was just like, why are you watching the news? What the fuck? And so my memory is that I didn't figure out what was happening for like a week. Which is maybe the most privileged thing that can happen to you ever. Maybe the most. So I appreciate all of you guys. This was really, really cool. Thank you very, very much for coming. I hope to have you all again at some point, because we're never leaving our houses. So like we can do this all again infinitely. And this was amazing. Thank you to the Comedy Studio, everybody who was on here, so good. Please follow them, find them on the internet, and we'll do it all again. We'll be here next week, unless I die of COVID, in which case somebody else will be here and it'll be fine.
No,
No, I won't. It'll be fine.
Oh, no.
I'll be fine. I'll be just fine. It'll be fine. Thank you very much. Thanks to the Comedy Studio for having us, and see you again soon. Good night.
Good night.
Ooh, pizza's here.